Have you ever walked away from a situation thinking, wait, was that me? Am I overreacting? Or am I finally seeing something clearly? And somehow, the more you sit with it, the harder it becomes to tell. It makes me think of the line from The Office that hits a little too close sometimes. Am I the problem? I don't think I'm the problem. And honestly, haven't we all had moments like that? Sometimes the hardest thing isn't knowing what happened, it's trying to understand what it means. And when something feels emotionally intense enough, the mind starts reaching for certainty, even if that certainty is painful, even if it simplifies people, even if it turns someone into a villain or turns us into one in the process. Hi, it's me, Kimberly. Today's question is, am I the problem or are they? Before we go any further, quick note. This podcast is for reflection and conversation, not professional advice. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and listen in a way that feels supportive for you. And if this episode feels personal, that makes sense. This question usually does. I think this question shows up when something feels emotionally unresolved, not just confusing, activating. Because when we don't have clarity, the brain doesn't like sitting in uncertainty. So it seems to try to create a story that explains the discomfort. And usually that story becomes, was it me? Was it them? Did I overreact? Did I miss something? Sometimes all that is something much simpler and much more human. I don't feel emotionally safe or grounded in what just happened, and I need to make sense of it. And when we didn't get that sense of safety, the mind starts building explanations fast. Sometimes those explanations protect us. Sometimes they distort reality. Sometimes they do both at the same time. Something hurts deeply. It doesn't stay in the moment. It spreads into how we interpret everything else. We start thinking, people are unsafe. Everyone has bad intentions. I can't trust anyone anymore. And I want to pause here. Sometimes those beliefs come from real harm. Sometimes people do hurt us intentionally. Sometimes it is abuse. Sometimes it is betrayal. Other times, we take one or two painful experiences and unconsciously turn them into global rule about the world. And that's where this question really lives. Not just the event and the meaning we assign afterwards. Sometimes the most painful or shocking experience didn't just hurt emotionally. They reorganized how we see safety itself. It can feel like people are dangerous, closeness isn't safe, trust leads to harm. And if that was your lived experience, your nervous system isn't being irrational, it's trying to protect you. The nervous system job is not nuance, it's survival. It generalizes. It takes one strong emotional experience and tries to prevent it from happening again by expanding the warning system. Never again. In real life, most people are not trying to harm you. Situations are not coordinated danger. Most relationships are not villains versus victims. We end up in this uncomfortable middle place where your body feels danger, but your environment may not actually be dangerous anymore. And that creates confusion. Do I trust myself? Do I trust others? Do I shut down? Do I stay open? And honestly, both protections and openness are valid impulses. The challenge is learning when each one is appropriate. I thought if I just stayed distant enough, nothing could harm me again. There were seasons in my life where I confused isolation with safety. I thought if I just stayed distant enough, nothing could harm me again. What I didn't realize is the distance also keeps out connection. And eventually I had to learn discernment instead of extremes. When something hurts, we have to make it make sense quickly. So instead of sitting with complexity, we simplify. Who is in the wrong? Who caused this? Who is the problem? Ambiguity is uncomfortable, but simplifications come at a cost. It flattens people. It flattens ourselves. Most relational conflict is not one-dimensional. It usually contains miscommunication, emotional triggers, old wounds getting activated, different expectations, lack of timing, missed signals, and when all of that collides, it can also feel personal, even when it's actually relational. The mind prefers identity-based conclusions. They're toxic, or I am the problem. They don't care, because identity feels stable even when it's inaccurate. I don't think the most helpful framing is, am I the problem or are they? I think a more grounding question is, what is happening in this dynamic? The question forces us to slow down. It asks us to zoom out. Who has power here? What patterns are repeating? What gets rewarded in this system? What gets punished? What am I responsible for? What is not mine? Not all relationships are built on equal footing, and pretending they are creates confusion about accountability. Power doesn't always look like control or dominance. Sometimes it looks like financial stability, housing security, emotional regulation capacity, who others believe first, social influence, exit options, legal or structure authority. When power is uneven, responsibility often becomes uneven too. Here's a nuance we often miss. Someone can feel emotionally powerless while still having structural power, and someone can feel emotionally intense while having less structural control. Both experiences can be real, but they are not the same thing. It's also necessary to turn inward and ask, what do I tend to do in conflict? Do I over-explain? Do I try to repair too quickly? Do I avoid conflict until it builds? Do I stay in situations too long because I hope they'll change? For me, I had to learn that I often try to resolve things through communication, even when the other person isn't ready or willing to engage in repair. And I've had to learn that not every moment needs more words. Sometimes it needs distance. Sometimes it needs time. Sometimes it needs to accept that not everything will be resolved the way I want. That isn't blame, that's pattern awareness. And pattern awareness is what actually changes outcomes over time. There are also moments where the dynamic itself communicates clearly. Your feelings are dismissed, your boundaries are discouraged, your emotional needs are reframed as too much. The focus repeatedly shifts away from the original issue. And in those moments, the question is not always, what did I do wrong? Sometimes it's, what is this relationship showing me about what I can hold? Not every dynamic is meant to be repaired. Some are meant to be understood, some are meant to be released, and some are meant to adjust with distance. I think we struggle with the word information. We want everything to be redeemable. Sometimes clarity is simply data. Most relational situations are not clean. They are not one person right, one person wrong. They are misunderstandings, misfires, emotional activation, unspoken expectations, old pain entering new conversation. And two people can hold both by trying their best and still hurt each other. That doesn't erase responsibility. It does remove the fantasy that everything is simple. One of the biggest shifts we can make is learning to separate what happened from what we decided it meant. The brain turns moments into narratives very quickly. Reality says, a conversation didn't go well. Stories say, I am always the problem. Reality says, we misunderstood each other. Story says, they don't care about me. Stories feel stable, but they are not always accurate. This is the point where reflection turns into distortion, where instead of understanding behavior, we assign identity. We say, this is who they are, this is who I am, and I want to be honest, I've done this too. Most people have, especially when we've been hurt. Labeling someone removes ambiguity. It also removes complexity, and complexity is where truth usually lives. We also have to be careful when applying blame in family systems. Children, including adult children, do not operate from equal power positions. They are shaped by the system they did not choose. When we talk about estrangement or distance, we have to separate harm from full responsibility. Parents carry the responsibility for environment, emotional safety, modeling, and protection. That does not mean children can never cause harm. It means we have to be careful about assigning equal weight when the power was never equal. Sometimes adult children step away not out of rejection, but out of protection. Protection for themselves, their mental health, or for their own children. And I think we are also in a cultural movement where it has become too easy to label children as the problem. And I don't think that's leading to any healing. Accountability is difficult. When you were raised in environments where being wrong had consequences, because then being wrong doesn't feel like growth, it feels like danger. But in healthy dynamics, accountability sounds like this. I see my part. I understand how that landed. What can we do differently next time? And safe people do not weaponize your accountability, they hold space for it. In my work with kids, I slow things down intentionally. We unpack misunderstandings, we check assumptions, we separate intent from impact. Sometimes I ask, does that sound like something I would say? And often the answer is no. We explore what actually got triggered instead. And I also model ownership. My communication could have been clear. That way, no one becomes the villain. We just understand the interaction, and that is a skill many adults were never taught. I've stayed in dynamics too long. I've ignored patterns. I've taken responsibility for things that were never mine to carry. And I've also learned something that changed how I move through relationships. Clarity does not require staying. Sometimes clarity means distance. Sometimes clarity means repair. Sometimes clarity means release. And none of those make you look good or bad. They make you honest. Because growth is not about deciding who the problem is. It's about noticing what keeps repeating and choosing differently, even when it's uncomfortable, even when your nervous system wants certainty, even when your history wants a villain, even when your emotions want a simple answer. Sometimes the most honest answer is, I contributed, they contributed, and this dynamic does not work for me anymore. And that can still be enough truth to move forward. Not every story is meant to end in understanding everything perfectly. Some stories end in awareness, some end in boundaries, some end in walking away without needing full agreement for everyone involved. And if you've been someone who has overfunctioned in relationships or taken too much responsibility or stayed too long trying to fix something, then maybe the real shift isn't figuring out who was the problem. Maybe it's trusting that you don't need perfect clarity to choose yourself next. Back to the question, am I the problem or are they? Maybe the answer was never meant to be labeled. Maybe it's context, power, patterns, history, emotion, timing. Maybe sometimes healing is not about assigning blame at all, about finally learning how to see clearly enough to stop repeating what hurts you without turning yourself or anyone else into a permanent identity. Clarity isn't about blame, it's about choices. And what you choose next is where your life actually changes. Thanks again for listening to my rambles. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm Kimberly. I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay with that. If this felt familiar, uncomfortable, or oddly relatable, you're probably in the right place. If you're looking for a community of people navigating balance and asking honest questions, follow along. We'll keep thinking, we'll keep growing, and we'll keep asking questions together.